Hello, Kevin Furman here. Hey, we're doing another installment on Book of the Month for E3LC, which is my company name. I do coaching. I also do some business consulting and health consulting. And today we're going to discuss three more chapters of How to Have Confidence and Power in Dealing with People by Les Giblin. So if you missed the first couple of weeks, feel free to check out the other videos on this playlist. And as always, if you need to get a hold of me, if you have questions or comments or suggestions on books, my email is kfurman@e3lc.net. Furman is Fuhrman. If you're on the channel, you can see how it's spelled, but it doesn't hurt to say it. So I'm just going to jump right in. So the book itself is in the month of being effective with people. So the E3LC that I mentioned, which is E3 leadership training and coaching and consulting. So the E3, there are three E's that I talk about when I'm doing training or talking about figuring out, like how do you create a great life, right? And it's all a process. I'm certainly in the process too, and have been trying to figure out my way through this crazy world. Um, so E3 is effective with people, efficient with things, and encouraging with myself. So this is the second book that I'm doing this year on being effective with people. And so you can check out the first month I did, which was in a previous one. So you can check out the whole month there and see my thoughts on that. But this week we're going to do chapters 8, 9, and 10 in how to have confidence, power, dealing with people. So chapter 8 is going to be probably the longest chunk of what I'm going to talk about today, and the one that seemed to just have a lot to just at least discuss or bring up or relay, if you will. So is the chapter name is how to develop skill in using words. So he makes a point. Now he wrote this in the 50s, so there's some contextual things in here. Not too many. There's every once in a while in the book you can tell it's a dated book, but generally speaking, he speaks about timeless truths and just human relations. He doesn't talk about of the time. He kind of talks about human beings over time and concepts that helped him become a national salesman of the year and et cetera. And apparently at one point had a clinic on human relations and helped thousands of people and sold lots of books and had tapes and videos and things like that way back in the day. So I don't know much about him. I tried to do some research. I thought I'd share something about that, and there really isn't a whole lot other than what's written about him through his books. So more research for another day, apparently. So anyway, chapter 8. All right, so how do you develop skill using words? So he starts by saying, he kind of lays the groundwork by saying, look, if you study successful people, one of the things that's a consistent trait of successful people is their skill in using words. And I think he doesn't really say it explicitly in here. I think it kind of makes sense if you just look at it from even just a logical standpoint, but just if you're able to communicate your ideas well to other people with some passion, with some thought, with some, you know, fervor, if you will, um, you'll have a better time connecting, right? You'll have a better time relating, and they'll have a better time relating to you, in that they can see you care. You're able to speak in a way that's understandable, right? You're not trying to sound important. You're just saying the words that are true, and they're true for you, and things that you found that have been helpful. And that's actually what this whole video series is really all about. Is just it's my take on it. And as I get people stopping in, we'll discuss more. But for now, it'll be me sharing, and hopefully more later. So anyway, so the main thing is, you know, you work on your skill of word usage, and he gets it. He's not talking about how to write better or how to have a better IQ or anything. He's just talking about how do you relate to people better. That was his whole thing, right? So he really, it starts with just starting a conversation. Now you're going to hear outside noises, as you can tell. It's summertime where I'm at, which is short-lived, so I want to be outside. Just to throw that out there. So you're going to hear some extra noises. I apologize. Anyway, so he talks about it in terms of just conversation. That's his biggest thing. And again, I think I brought up the whole thing of being a salesman is that for him, that's what it is. It's a conversation with people. You're trying to figure out how you can help them. You're trying to be slick, like, ooh, this thing's really cool and you really need this and let me talk you into it. He was nothing like that from what I can tell. He was just a guy that just liked to talk to people and liked selling stuff and making money, right? Um, Beyond that, I have to, like I said, I have to do some more research. I'm sure he was awesome and a really great guy. He seems to be very happy and successful, and be worth studying. Anyway, so again, he's kind of talking about conversations. He's not talking about being the most intelligent, raising your IQ, or having a huge vocabulary. He's not. That's not at all what he was talking about. He was talking about how to have skill with your words with people in everyday life. And so he just talks about conversation. And so the rest of the chapter really is kind of about that. So his first point is really it's just how to strike up a conversation. And the biggest thing that jumped out at me in this chapter was stop trying to be perfect. And man, I remember too many times when I would think, oh, I should talk to that person, or even like I wanted to ask a woman out on a date, being hetero for a moment. Um, I would stop. I would come up with all these reasons, and it was mainly I would look at my shortcomings and then say, well, they would never accept me because of those shortcomings. I was trying to be the perfect date before I even met somebody, which is ridiculous when I look back on it. But I ran through my head so many times, and I still catch myself here and there in certain situations. I know it still pops up. I don't heed it as much as I used to. I don't listen to that kind of thinking as much. But man, I know for lots of times it would stop me. It would stop me from auditioning in the music world. It would stop me from doing things um, in a bigger, grander scale. Oh, man, just horrible, horrible, horrible. So anyway, that I'm extrapolating a little bit, but I can relate. Like just trying to be perfect in a conversation. That's not the point to be perfect, right? Even if you are perfect, who wants to talk to the perfect person for very long, right? It just highlights our imperfections. So it just doesn't that it's just an unrealistic expectation that you have to be perfect to have a conversation with somebody, right? You're you. Everybody has their their flaws. Everybody has the things, their little quirks or whatever. It's what makes things interesting. So perfect is really kind of silly, but yet that's what we tend to do. We tend to overemphasize our shortcomings and then gloss over others and just kind of increase all their great traits and just put this big comparison between they're so high on the list and I'm way down here, right? So silliness. Anyway, he says and so to just put some light on it, he talks about in the early stage, especially in an early stage of conversation, at least 50% of what you talk about means nothing. It's meaningless, silly, right? And he says that first, and he says, especially at the beginning. So even in conversations that are meaningful, half of it is not. If you just look at how people converse and what happens, so really you kind of get, and he gets to the next point, which is small talk isn't supposed to be deep. He says brilliant actually is his word, and it's just small talk. Small meaning small, right? It's just you're just talking, you're just doing your thing. It's not meant to be this huge endeavor. And I tend to think, oh man, small talk. It seems like a quote waste of time. I'd rather talk about super important things, right? Which I would, but that's not how you meet people, generally speaking. Unless you're in a meeting or something that's about that sort of thing, you're not going to get to that deep level right away, just right off the bat with people. That's silly to expect that, and I have done that too. That's been a failing of mine that I've tried to work through. So I don't know, just warm up to people, right? And you say, well, okay, well, how do you warm up to people? Basically, it's kind of simple, and I already know this, and I do this at times, but it's just have people talk about themselves, right? How do they warm up to you? You don't try to be the perfect person that they'll like, right? You just ask them about it. Be interested in other people. Find out what they're. Be curious. Really, And he talks about it at the end of and at the end of the chapter, though. It's like questions to ask, like, really, well, how did you learn how to do that? Oh, wow, that's pretty cool. What made you want to do that? Right? Those are very vague questions, but you would fill in details with the question, like, what made you want to go golfing every week? Right? Okay, you mean obviously it's important. Like, What's cool about it? Like, why do you like it? Not like, well, why do you like that? Not like that, but just like curious, just being very curious about people, and just have them talk about like why they like what they like. Um, then the next thing he says along that train, right, is have them talk about themselves. And if you just let them talk about themselves, they're going to be much more willing to accept where you're at, or want to hear what you have to say once they get to talk about themselves. Right? There are some people that only want to talk about themselves. That's fine. Most people, they like to talk about themselves, but then they realize, oh, I should reciprocate, right? And they realize it's a conversation and not just a fact-finding mission, which you shouldn't think of it that way either, right? That puts people off. So you got to be careful with that. Um, so the other thing he brings up, he, but he, in that context, right? He says you, you, is a magic word if you use it correctly, right? If you're always talking about them, it's not about I did this or I like that or well, what do you like? You always think about that. And if the conversation starts to veer kind of towards you, you can kind of do a U-turn, is what he talks about. Just start talking about them, right? What do you think about that? What's you know, and then he gets into what I would call asking open-ended questions, and that's what I was kind of referring to earlier. He says, start asking questions that start with why or how or where, and not and use open-ended, like how did you feel about that, or how did you get involved with that, right? It doesn't have to be a feeling thing, but how did or one of these is how did you manage that, right? So it's not that you have to like figure out some deep connection and then talk about that. You just be curious where they're at again. And the open-ended question idea is big. So open-ended, like how, why, and if you ask questions like, "Did you da 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 da," like if someone can answer with a yes or a no, that's basically a closed-ended question, right? They're not bad necessarily if you're trying to find something very specific and then move on to another open-ended question allows them to talk more detail, and they can't just answer with one word if they want if they want to continue the conversation. So let's see here. Okay, then he says so. In here, he talks about a rule to follow is ask yourself mentally this question: what do I really want in this situation? And that made me think of an acronym I've heard recently that I actually really I like quite a bit because it's sort of a double deal, and it's the word wait, WAIT. If you think of it as an acronym, and you think of okay, if I'm going to talk to someone, wait for a second and ask yourself, why am I talking? Right? If you want to really get to know someone, you want to listen to them, right? And we're going to get to that in the next chapter, but if you ask yourself, why am I talking? And if it's to generally find out information, great, right? If you're talking to just talk, you might want to stop for a second and just ask them a question about them, right? Turn about them. So now there is time, he says, now there is time to talk about yourself. So if there's a genuine connection, if you have a shared experience, and it's not about being one up, like, oh yeah, well, I had a bigger one, a better one, right? You just don't do that, right? All you're gonna do is put them on, on the defense at that point. You just say, "Oh yeah, I'm from that state too. Where did you grow up?" Right? And it's just sort of natural, like, oh, there is a connection there. You're not like trying to make a connection, like, oh, I thought about going to that state one time. That's a little goofy, right? That's like a manufactured thing. But if you actually are from the same state, say so, right? Or if you like the same sports team, or if you took a vacation in the same place, or whatever, right? Or you like the same TV show or a movie or whatever. You just start talking about shared experiences, and that creates a little more connection. So that's a case where you do want to talk to yourself. You do want to make that happen. And then the other thing, he talks about this really quickly, but he says the other thing about what helps people be attracted is people they agree with, right? If you agree with them on something, great, talk a lot about that. If you don't agree with them, just start asking questions, open-ended questions about why they think that and what's up. You don't have to tell them you disagree. You're curious, like, oh really? What do you think? Why do you think that? How come that is? And not that you're trying to change their mind. You just want to know, right? And then you can finding their point. There's probably a point where they'll say something that you do have a common ground. You can kind of launch to that part, and then you have agreement. So he says, we tend to like people who agree with us, and we tend to dislike people who don't agree with us. That's not always true, right? I mean, it's just a general rule. And again, he's talking the realm of like sales and working with people and being successful with people, being effective with people. Is generally speaking, if you agree, you're gonna like them more. If you disagree, you're not gonna like them as much, right? And so he just try to find agreement. And then the other thing is, um, yeah, he makes a point of like just don't be a downer, right? Don't be a gloomy Gus is the way he put it. So just and he kind of encapsulated with this: just don't air your troubles with in public, right? And you go, well, yeah, but sometimes I just need to say right? And he's right. I mean, you do need to vent at times. We're humans, right? We have feelings. We go through stuff too, no matter what. We're not robots only concerned about others. That's a different issue. Um, so he talks about if you have something you really got to get off your chest, sit down, write it out, write a letter to yourself. Just write it out, right? Everything is just, oh, I hate this. I don't like that. I wish that hadn't happened. Should have said this. They were mean. Whatever, right? And I just, I'm so mad. Just write it all out. And then he says, then the next thing you do with that is burn it. So write it all out, read it, like fully just let it in, work through it, and then burn the letter and let it go. I think there's a good kind of picture and mental picture of that burning your complaining, burning your troubles away, right? And they just evaporate into the ether. Something to be said for that, right? Um, so then the last thing he talks about is he picks up on this, but really is just these three things. The last part of the chapter is eliminate three things from your speaking, and that'll help you um, really be more skillful. Is with people for sure. Is he says eliminate kidding, teasing, and sarcasm from your conversation. And I personally have wrestled with this a very long time. Not all of them. Actually, sarcasm is probably the biggest one for me. I don't tease people a lot, and I kid people here and there, but it's not really kidding. I'm just making an observation. It's really I do it, and I don't. Now that I say it, it's like yeah, I do that. So he says don't. Right? Don't do that because you don't. And he's right though. I mean, he's totally right because you don't know how people are going to take it. You don't know. You think it's clever. You think it's cute. And they may at the moment, but it gets in there. Even if they know you're kidding, it still goes into their brain, and that's the impression you're putting upon them that you're kind of digging at them, right, or putting them down, even though it's a joke, and they know it's a joke. It still goes in. It's dangerous. It's just really dangerous. So you have to be very, very careful with that. So it's better just eliminate. He's right. Just eliminate it. So that's something to practice. All right. So there's chapter 8. That's going to be the one I'm going to say the most on. I'm going to go through the other two fairly quickly, but there's a lot in there, right? And he's just talking about using your words. And it's really all about just starting conversations. And don't worry about being trite. Just talk to people and listen to them. Ask them questions. Have them talk about themselves, and don't judge. Basically, he doesn't say this, but he's talking about just don't judge people. Everybody's valid. Everybody's here on this earth, right? So their journey is just as valid as your journey. Um, so they go, all right, chapter 9. So this one says use a technique that a Supreme Court justice called magic. So basically, it boils down to one word, right? This is the magic in conversation and working with people, and it's a technique, if you will. You can call it for sure. Call it a technique. People have tried to do that. It's one word. Listen. Right now in this format, I'm talking to whoever is watching, so I'm not able to listen to you right now. But in a conversation, I know I purposefully have done this over the years, and I started out not being that great. I fall into old habits here and there, and I tend to think I know the right thing to say, and I like want to jump in like, oh, don't just listen, just let them say what they need to say, right, and then react. Don't worry about whether you know what they're going to say or not, but just let them say it and pay attention to what they have to say. That's one of the main points is actually pay attention to what they're saying. Don't just let them, you're like, okay, talk, talk, talk. Oh, they stopped. Okay, good. That's not listening, right? That's hearing sounds go by. That listening is actually paying attention to what they're saying, asking questions for clarifying, all kinds of things about that. So listening is an active process. Now, the thing about that is, if you listen well enough, they'll tell you what they want. So if you're in, say you're trying to persuade someone or you're trying to understand someone and you don't understand what's going on, you don't know why they're saying what they're saying or they're saying no to your idea or whatever, it's probably because you haven't listened well enough to what they've been saying to understand where they are. So if you, people, people will tell you what they want if you listen enough to what they're saying, because they'll give away where they are. If you let people talk enough, they'll give away their position, so to speak. You'll know where they stand with things by the way they're talking. So so there's that. So the whole thing is just listening, right? The whole chapter is about listening. So and he makes a point. Another one is that listening helps overcome self-consciousness. So if you're listening to someone else, your focus is on them. It's not on you. And then most of the time when I'm self-conscious, it's because I'm thinking about me, right? Self-conscious. I'm conscious of myself, right? Self-explanatory. But that's when things go funky, right? Because I'm not listening to what's going on. I'm worried about whether I'm making a good impression or whether I'm going to say the right thing or do I have enough trust built up yet? Or all that stuff goes on rather than just listen and be with them, which sounds simple, and it is, but it's not as easy as it sounds. It's very simple, but it's not as easy as it sounds because we got all that stuff going on. If we can kind of clear the clutter and just be with them and listen, that's really what you want. You want all your attention on them. Now, the other thing about that is if you if you put all your attention on them and try really hard to listen, like affectedly so, like just strangely so, that doesn't work either, right? It has to be a genuine curiosity about people, why they are doing what they're doing, and all that stuff. Then he makes another point. He talks about music, which I'm a musician by trade, so whenever people start talking analogies of music, it's a wheelhouse of mine. So he says, when you're not, when you don't try too hard, you just take in what's there. Sort of like listening to a piece of music. And he doesn't make this point exactly, but I'm going to use it. Um, you don't try to listen to the music. You just listen to it, right? Unless you're studying it for a particular reason, that's a different thing. But if you're just listening to music, you're just listening to the music and appreciating what's there. Yeah, and then so if to not try too hard, like on that note, is you just listen to what they're saying. You listen to the conversation, where it's coming from. Again, you try to clarify, have them ask them questions about why, how, um, those kinds of questions that will help bring up ideas or things that may or may not be what you thought. Let's see. So really, okay. So then at the end of the chapter, he points out 7 things. I'm just going to say them because I think it's worth saying this list. So this is 7 ways to practice listening. All right. So here are the 7. Look at the person who is talking. Right. Don't listen like this. Yep. Yeah. Looks great. Yeah. Sure. Yep. Sounds good. That's not going to communicate that you're listening very well. Appear deeply interested in what he's saying, and I would get rid of the appear. Be. Just change appear to be. Be deeply interested. Foster an interest in other people and what makes them tick. It will help you a ton. Ask questions, especially open-ended questions. Don't interrupt. Ask him to tell you more. Him or her, of course. Stick to the speaker's subject, right? Let them lead the conversation. Don't just interject some crazy thing, unless you could ask permission. Actually, is what I would addendum to this. Say, I have a crazy thought. It's okay if I ask you. And if enough trust is built, doesn't have to be a ton. They can say no or yes, like, nah, I'm kind of busy, I gotta go, or sure, whatever, right? But if you ask permission, you might be able to change the subject. Maybe you got somewhere to be and you want to enter because you like them. You want to kind of keep it going, but you can't stay. Hey, I got something to throw at you. What do you think about that? Great. Hey, I gotta go, but here's my number. Let's connect. All right, something like that. So I would agree, generally speaking, stick to what they're talking about, but you can alter a little bit. It says use the speaker's words to get your own point across. So basically, tell him. Um, well, he's talking about like let them talk about themselves, and then sort of oh, is this, oh, I heard this was really cool that you did this, right? Or I heard you say that. That's really cool. Tell me more about that. Right? It tells them you're listening so that when you bring up what your topic is, they're going to be more apt to listen to you. So there's the 7, right? So that is chapter 9. That's the whole deal, chapter 9. All right, chapter 10. So how to get others to see things your way quickly, right? And the quickly part always strikes my eye whenever I see that title. Um, so basically, in a nutshell, he talks about the natural way to go about doing things when people when people are gonna, like, there's a confrontation, or they're gonna he gives examples of being a store clerk, and a customer brings something back that obviously has been worn, and there's a policy against that kind of stuff, right? So how do you kind of work through that? And he says the natural inclination is to argue with them. He says don't do that. Don't argue with people. Now it doesn't mean you have to tell them they're right, right? And that's the flip side of this, like the customer is always right kind of mentality, which they're not always right. Let's just be honest. Like some people are just out to be, getting their own way, and they don't care about the rules. So, thing is, you can't. I mean, some people would say like arguing with people, you can't really win an argument. You can beat somebody down in submission, but you can't win an argument. So just don't argue, right? So the best way to do it is what he says is use low pressure. So it was more don't attack their ego, kind of like, well, you know, think of third person, like, I've heard that this other person said X. What do you think about that? Right? Rather than being you and them, you can bring a third person into the conversation, and it can be about what they said as opposed to what you're saying or what they said, not the person you're talking to. He said but it boils down to this: the big mistake is to win an argument. Trying to win an argument is to attack the ego of the other person. So instead of it being like you're wrong, that's stupid, all that kind of stuff that just puts everybody in the defense, it's just saying, that's interesting. Tell me more about why you think that. Let me understand what you mean, and then go through there. So there's that, right? So that's the biggest deal in there, and then he goes through some points, which I'm gonna see. He's got six ways to accomplish winning an argument, or discussing something, right? To have them see your side of what's going on, to persuade them, if you will, right? Okay, so here's the 6. Let him state his case. Again, let him talk full out. Don't interrupt. Pause momentarily before you answer, right? That's a really key point, right? They talk like they're done. Like, okay, so now you're done. I can blah, blah, blah. No, it's just like, okay, right? You want to contemplate what they're saying in the moment. Even if you know what they were going to say, contemplate it. Maybe they have a little bit different twist on it than you thought, right? Don't insist on winning 100% is his third point. So you may have to compromise. Like, I like that point of yours. How about we do this? Incorporate it this way. Then you state your case moderately and accurately, right? Don't embellish, don't overstate it, don't get all like dramatic with it, right? Just, yeah, here's what I'm thinking. And then he mentions that speak through third person, right? Rather than I think. Oh, I heard that these people, or there's a lot of people in the study that think X, Y, Z. Or I heard a poll, or I read a poll the other day. They think this. Um, Joe down the street was telling me the other day, blah, blah, blah. My uncle told me once, blah, 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 right? Just the third person. And then you can set it up so the other person can save face, right? So you can say, like the clerk idea. He does this in the book where he says, the clerk says, I'm bringing this back. No, it's never been worn. So the clerk, very adeptly says, oh yeah, sometimes, when I'm putting all my clothes together, something from the store gets kind of put in with some other things, and they get laundered by accident, or they get, put in with some things they shouldn't have, and maybe that happened. Maybe your husband, grabbed it by accident, and it got laundered or whatever. So it happens to me, and that's probably what happened here. So I can't, but that's probably this. So it's not like you're wrong, you wore this, you're a bad person. It's kind of giving them an out. So he talks about that. Okay, so there you go. There's the 3 chapters of that. We are going to finish the book next week. So chapters 11 through 14, and and then I'll talk about the book after that. We're going to be actually moving after next week. We're going to be moving to Efficient with Things types books. So we're going to do a couple months on those, which I'm looking forward to also. So if you got any questions or comments, let me know. kfurman at e3lc.net, or here, just give me some comments here too. Otherwise, we'll see you around. Thanks a lot for checking it out. Take care.